Starting with this Fox News alert, the Justice Department has released former special counsel Jack Smith's report on the investigation into the Trump election interference case.
Smith's final report, sent to Congress just after midnight, claims that the president-elect, Donald Trump, would have been convicted if he had not won the presidential race. Smith writing, quote, "It has long been the department's interpretation that the Constitution forbids the federal indictment of a prosecution of a sitting president. But for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, he's talking about his own office. The office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial."
Trump, who had tried to block the report's release, responded on Truth Social saying, quote, "Deranged Jack Smith was unable to successfully prosecute the political opponent of his boss, crooked Joe Biden. The voters have spoken."
All right, the newly released report is one of two volumes put together by Smith. Here we go. Volume 2 is regarding the classified documents case. Attorney General Merrick Garland said he would not release that since the co-defendants are still facing prosecution. So expect that a little bit later on. Let's bring in constitutional law attorney, former federal prosecutor Katie Cherkowski. Katie, it's not a big deal. It's not news when a prosecutor says he would have got a conviction. What's your takeaway from what we just learned?
Well, that's absolutely right. This is nothing more than a prosecution on paper. It's every prosecutor's dream. You have no rebuttal. You have no cross-examination. You don't actually have to prove this case. And in fact, nothing in this report is particularly new. Jack Smith had released the indictment, the superseding indictment. All the same facts are there. The American people overwhelmingly voted for President Trump, knowing all of what he claims would have sustained this conviction on these unprecedented charges. So quite frankly, this is just a partisan effort at lawfare, yet again, couched in legal jargon.
So, Katie, he focuses on a couple things. He said that he had to do this, had to prosecute the former president, now president-elect, because there were other J6ers that were prosecuted. He then goes on and says that he had to do this criminally because the political act of impeachment wasn't enough. But the thing that got my attention was number 3, when he talks about when the president said peacefully and patriotically protest. But he says the president said fight, fight, fight 10 times after that. He hinged it on fight, fight, fight. My mind goes to the most iconic moment of the president, which is when he was attempted to be assassinated and he said fight, fight, fight. So how does he use that as justification?
Well, there is obviously no smoking gun evidence here. And as you pointed out, all of these supposed pieces of evidence are subject to interpretation, which is exactly the point of our adversarial system, exactly the point of actually confronting the prosecution's evidence with the rebuttal, such as what you just mentioned. So again, the underlying issue with proving this case was always going to be to prove the criminal intent of Donald Trump. And that hasn't been established by this report, and I don't think it would have been established in a courtroom with any sort of due process. But certainly, I think this is just a shame that this was released. I think that it is just pure lawfare and serves absolutely no purpose but to undermine Americans' confidence in the justice system one last time here.
Katie also released was the DOJ David Weiss special counsel report on the investigation into Hunter Biden, confirming that Hunter did make millions using the family name. He writes, quote, "As a well-educated lawyer and businessman, Mr. Biden consciously and willfully chose not to pay at least $1.4 million in taxes over a 4-year period. Mr. Biden made this money by using his last name and connections to the secure, lucrative business opportunities." What are your thoughts when you read through this?
Well, this report was a very strong rebuke that there was any sort of selective prosecution of Hunter Biden. There was overwhelming evidence of criminality against him. I think, again, that this has been established through his court proceedings. And, of course, the blanket pardon that he received, very unprecedented, which Mr. Weiss also feels was highly unusual and maybe even unfair given the gravity of his criminality here. And just as a kind of overarching issue, I think that we really need to revisit the legitimacy of releasing these special counsel reports in cases that either were dismissed from courthouses or were never brought. There is a discretionary policy of the DOJ that's allowed for this to occur, but I really take issue with it on really both sides of the aisle here politically.
Well, Katie, I love the fact that Mr. Weiss did release the Hunter Biden stuff, because essentially he said, Yeah, Hunter Biden traded on his name, made a lot of money, didn't pay his taxes. We knew that. But then he goes after the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, and says essentially he blasts Joe for the pardon and making baseless accusations about his inquiry that threaten the integrity of the justice system as a whole. You can't have the guy who's the president of the United States, who's in charge ultimately in his administration of the Department of Justice, saying, yeah, those guys down at DOJ, they're screwing with my kid. Not true, he said.
Well, that's actually a good point. And certainly, I think Joe Biden's legacy in large part is just the undermining of the justice system in total. So it works on both sides, using it to target political enemies and then claiming that any legitimate use of it to go after your criminal son is somehow illegitimate. So it's an inversion across the board of the processes that we should be respecting here as Americans. And certainly the president of the United States should be the leader of that. And so this kind of reiterates Joe Biden's issues with the justice system in total.
My sense is James Comer's book and investigations will proceed once he's out of office that will answer.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.